why are they significant? Let's talk about this a little bit because, a lot of the content that we know about ancient Kemet comes from tombs, comes from things that they did from a religious perspective. And that's why we've talked so much about their religion and about concepts with respect to them, because that's really what their perspective is. That's really where they're coming from. And a lot of the amazing things that you see that they've done with their art and their literature and their architecture and their science and their development all came from their religion, came from their perspective of the world and how they viewed God. And I want to thank all of you for sharing and joining. And I'll just say up front that I do have a new book that is called Religion of the Black Land. I have a link down below if you want to take a look at it. It's on Amazon. It talks about some specific documents from ancient Kemetic and Kushite philosophy from their theology, the Shabaka stone, the Memphite theology, the 42 not negative confessions but declarations of innocence, the Asarian tell. It talks about that in this new book. It's available on Amazon. So we can kind of get into not just, what they did, but why they did what they did. And I think that that's a significant thing because their perspective and their worldview came from their religion, came from their belief and their connection with God. And religion is just a way to connect with God. It's a way to connect with those things that are in you, that are a part of you, that are driving you. But you maybe, have a difficult way of maybe expressing it another way. It's a way of kind of putting this in a more formalized way so that you can go about this with a thought and a plan, go about this with kind of a roadmap. And they definitely put together a roadmap. They definitely put together their beliefs and their thoughts in writing. And that's where the Coffin texts come in. So we're going to talk about the Coffin texts and some of the things that the Coffin texts say and have said. And we're going to talk about this more than one episode, if you will, more than one show, if you will, because it's a lot to the Coffin text. But what are the Coffin texts? When were they written and why are they significant? They come from a religious perspective, obviously, right? We're talking about ancient Kemet, and you can see this coffin of this very beautiful lady here from the New Kingdom. But the Coffin texts start to develop in the first intermediate period, and they are kind of what they sound like. They're coffin texts. They're basically words and writings inside coffins, around coffins that talk about the person who's deceased, whose tomb or coffin it is, and how they are going to do things in the afterlife, how they're going to hopefully have an afterlife that's full of peace, how they've lived according to the ways of Asar, how they've lived a good life. And that gets you, that's your ticket into the afterlife. And we've talked about that in another episode, with the Egyptian perspective of the afterlife. We talked about that in another episode, which you can look up, or I can put a link down below. But that whole key to having a peaceful afterlife had a lot to do with how you lived your life here. It was based on how your deeds here. It wasn't just based on, who you were or how much money you had or those. It was based on how you treated other people, how you serviced God, how you were honest and honorable towards your religion, how you honored the people and the things and the deities and the expressions of God that were in your town, in your family, in your life, and how you lived up to that moral code. And that's what would make Asar oppressed with you and make us judge you having been true of voice and true of heart and your heart weighing out against that feather. That happens when you do good deeds in life. So the coffin texts are those types of texts and those beliefs written down inside coffins. So as we talk about them, I have this little resource that I'm going to talk about just to give us a timeline, right? So as we're thinking about the timeline, this happens to be a picture from Kush, from the Sudan, of some pharaohs and deities there. But this timeline would just give us a little bit of perspective in terms of the coffin text. So before you had the coffin text, you had the pyramid text. So we think about pyramids, and a lot of times we think about pyramids. Sometimes we may think about the pyramids as if they happened sometimes, maybe later on in ancient Kemetic history and ancient Egyptian history. And I used to think when I was growing up, they're so great, the great pyramids, they must have happened later on. We have this sometimes in this world and this way we look at the day and the way we live today, a linear way of thinking, right? If something that great took place, it must have taken place later on in their history. Not so. The pyramid texts and the pyramids take place early on in ancient Kemetic history. They take on place in the Old Kingdom. So if you look up here, that timeline, 3100 BC or thereabouts, starts the kingdom of Kemet, if you will. It starts the joining of the two lands. That's when the upper and the lower part of ancient Kemet are separated and they come together. There's already a culture there, guys. There's already a belief in God. There's already a religion in place. There's already writing in place. There's already probably a calendar in place, most likely. There are already traditions. There's already a white crown of upper Kemet. All these things are already in place, and we find them in Custal. We find them various aspects of it and seeds of it in Naphtali 1,000 years before that. We find things up and down the Nile Valley that indicate there's already trade routes between the people in what is today Northern Sudan and ancient Kemet and farther south in Africa and even beyond into the Mediterranean. There's already that in place before Kemet becomes a society, a political society, because that's so important to think about, because we like to put them in holes, and we like to put them in batches and say this took then in this place, and nothing starts. We have these dates, way of drawing lines in the sand as if nothing was happening in human history before that. This person had to write this down, or there was no history before that, or this person had to do this in this way, or there was nothing happening. But that's not the case. That's not how human beings develop. Obviously, there's more going on than the dates we pick. So when we think about that, we look at about 3100 BC as the time the two lands joined together. But that did not mean that was the birth of the culture. The culture was already in place, and obviously there will be development and growth in the culture. Things will change over a 3,000 year period. That's going to change, right? So you are going to have development in the culture, but there was a culture already in place before 3100 BC, a calendar, writing, and all that good stuff. So the pyramids, like the great pyramids you see in ancient Kemet and you see at Giza, they are built during the Old Kingdom. So they are built around, let's say, 2600 BC or thereabouts. They're built during the Old Kingdom. They're built, some 2,500 years before Christ. So they're built 4,600 years at least, right? So they are before the Coffin text. They are before what you see in the New Kingdom. They are part of the Old Kingdom, the actual pyramids, and they're built in the fourth dynasty. So they're not even built, in the later time. They're built in the fourth dynasty, and the step pyramid is built in the third dynasty. And then after that, in the fifth dynasty, you start to see these writings appear on different, not just coffins, but different things inside the pyramid. So King Unas, who was the last king of the fifth dynasty, he was the first to have these writings put inside the wall, on the walls of his tomb in the fifth dynasty. He was the last king of the fifth dynasty. So those are called the pyramid texts. So you see King Unas, you see Pepi II, you see Pepi I, you see Menkaure, you see various queens in the fifth and sixth dynasty. They have these religious writings on their walls inside the pyramids, and they're called pyramid texts, right? And a lot of them have a lot to do with, obviously, spiritual things. There's so much. We're going to dig into the pyramid texts. I mean, they talk about a lot. They talk about pygmies. They talk about Atum. They talk about there being one source of creation. They talk about, there's a lot in the pyramid text, and we are going to talk about that. But then, as things move on, the pyramid texts are there and people have pyramids, and then people start to change their tombs. Everybody's not making huge pyramids because that's kind of hard to do, I guess. You start to have during this intermediate period, between the Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom. And you see the Middle Kingdom starts around 2030 BC. In that intermediate period, they call it the first intermediate period for ancient Kemet. And then you have the founding of the Middle Kingdom by Mentuhotep II. Well, during that intermediate period and in the Middle Kingdom, you start to have people not just writing inside tombs, inside the pyramids, on the walls of pyramids. You start to have people writing inside the coffins, and these are the coffin texts. So if you are ever asking, you're thinking about what are the coffin texts, or what are the differences between the coffin text and the pyramid text, a lot of it has to do with just where they were writing and when they were writing. So the pyramid text come before the coffin text. They start in the Old Kingdom under King Unas in the fifth and sixth dynasty and thereabouts, and the coffin texts come about in the Middle Kingdom, right there around Mentuhotep II and just before him. And so what do they say? Like, what do the coffin texts say? And I want to remind us as we talk about the coffin text, as we start to think about various things with respect to that, the idea of the deities become very significant. And we talked about there being one source of creation in ancient Kemetic people believing in Nectar, and there being one source of creation. And you'll see Ptah, you'll see Atum, you'll see Ra, and Ra representing that force and that vitality that's in everything, that animates everything, that force, those pushes and pulls that impact us, that are an expression of God and part of the first expressions of God. When God first became awake, when God first decided to create beingness and to create existence, and to create, you have these aspects of God that are there, that are Ptah and Atum and self-rejuvenation and Amen and hiddenness, and Ra as in terms of vitality and life force. Those things are there. So you'll see these things mentioned in the pyramid text. You'll see them mentioned, and you'll see them, and in the coffin text, you'll see them mentioned. So as we think about that, there's some remarkable things that are in the coffin text. And I want to talk about the 4 great deeds of Ra. So if you look at some resources, and you'll just even see, this was from the ancient Near Eastern text that was written back in 1969. You have several references of these 4 great deeds of Ra. They were found in several coffins in the middle part of ancient Kemet during the Middle Kingdom, or just before the official start of the Middle Kingdom. The 11th dynasty was already in existence, but just before the official start of the Middle Kingdom. And there's a wonderful thing, because you're talking about Ra in terms of his existence. I kind of want to jump into now and to talk about it, because there are things that we can learn from. There are things that we can learn from ancient Kemet, and we can learn from the deeds of Ra. We can learn about this. So these 4 great deeds of Ra, they're found inside coffins during the Middle Kingdom, specifically 4 coffins where they found us, and they believe there are others, but obviously this is 4,000 years ago, 4 to 5,000 years ago. It's a lot hard to find a lot of this stuff, right? But they found it in these coffins, and as you find what's still in existence, what has survived, because some of these tombs in the middle part of ancient Kemet were destroyed because of quarrying techniques that are relatively recent, where they use dynamite and explosives to blow up to get, loosen up rocks. And that destroyed some of these tombs that were in the middle part of Kemet. But, that's neither here nor there. So the 4 great deeds of Ra, inside the coffin text, several of these coffins, it talks about Ra as being the creator, right? And we talked about how the ancient Kemetic people would assign creation to Ra, to Atum, to Amen, to Ptah, to different aspects of God, different aspects of Neter. So here they're talking about Ra. And Ra, and in it, it's talking about very interesting things. It says, I made the 4 winds so that everyone could breathe during their lifetime, like giving breath to everybody. You start to hear these gifts, if you will, these great things that Ra as in its creative force began and gave to mankind that were just amazing things that God did. And so I made things so that people can breathe. And the idea of the breath of life, and obviously when you pass away and that last breath that you take is a significant thing. So you would know that people will be aware of that, and very significant, the being able to breathe. And this document becomes significant because, a lot of times we talk about equality amongst men and women, equality amongst people in general. And sometimes we think that that's like a new expression, that we are doing something new when we say that. And then we start to look and read and say, wait a minute, when you look at history, people had these concepts long before that. It isn't just this linear, like I said, way of looking, very simplistic, very, black and white, very, very, here's the line. And nobody did this until this one person started doing it, or until we started doing it many, many years later. That's not how it happened in history. A lot of these ideas were already in place. And a lot of times when you come with an idea, somebody's already had it. You're just building on top of what your ancestors have already done. You're building on top of what people who came before you have already done. So in this coffin text, some 2,000 years before Christ, 4,000 years ago, he's talking about everybody having the breath of life. And that's one of the great deeds that Ra and the Creator has done. And then he also talks about, I made great floods so that the rich and the poor and everybody, the everyday people, could benefit from water, that the waters would be beneficial to everybody. That there's no distinction into that life-giving property, that life-giving creation of water. I don't make a distinction between the rich person and the noble person, or the person who might be of everyday means. There's no distinction. I make it so that everyone benefits from water. And when you start to think about that, this whole concept of equality, and we talk about civil rights movement, we talk about the idea of equality here. And sometimes we think that, we are progressing because we've come out of, slavery and a slave mentality and a slave way of doing things in America and the Western world. And now we're talking about equal rights and electing women as presidents and things like that in various places, and as vice presidents, and that's a progress. But when you look back in ancient times, you will find that they were already doing some of these things in a lot of places, in particular in Africa, in particular in Kush. In a lot of places, they were doing these things, and they don't always represent completely new ideas. These ideas that may have been around before. So this idea that water was being made, and the great floods that come in the Nile every year are to benefit all people, not just one person or one type of person. It's to benefit the rich, the poor, the everyday person. It's to benefit. And then another remarkable thing is that I made everyone just like his brother or sister. I made all men, all people alike. I didn't give, one person some special, passage or some special ticket. Everybody has essentially the same opportunities. When you look at people in general, no matter where we are in the world, we're pretty much similar. I mean, literally from a DNA perspective, there's literally like no difference between us. And there are differences that we see that are outward are very small. We pretty much, when you look at us, we're pretty much the same wherever you go. And that's a gift of God. That was considered to be a great deed of Ra. Ra was considered to have done something remarkable in making everybody alike. I mean, I don't care if you go to Australia or to the British Isles, or you go to South America, if you go to South Africa, wherever you go, Australia, people are pretty much like, there's very little difference. And that idea that's being expressed in this coffin text some 4,000 years ago is basically saying, I give everybody pretty much the same faculties, the same abilities. Nobody is giving more of an advantage from God's perspective than another person. Think about that. Think about how over the past several hundred years, 400 years, 500 years, we've grown up on this idea where one group of people is better than another. Whether that's a group of people that are God's people, or a group of people that are a particular color, or a group of people who happen to have money, whatever, or men versus women, men or whatever it is, we've grown up with these silly ideas where we begin to demark, and we put these lines, and we begin to segregate people, and we begin to say that this person is better than that person, and this person is to be desired because their clothes are this way, or their nose is this way, or they wear an earring or something like that, right? We have these very silly things. And here's this person 4,000 years ago, not just one, but several coffins, and the coffin text saying, God is saying, Ra is saying that I made all men alike. I made every man just like his brother, every woman just like her sister. I've made everybody alike. I didn't give people special advantages. That whole idea of the civil rights movement, the whole idea of equality, it's being spoken about in a remarkable way. It's being touched on right here 4,000 years ago. So I ask us to think about that and to jog our memory. The other thing he says is, I did not command people to do evil. Now, I know I've talked about this, and I literally had not read this before I talked about this several weeks ago. But he said, I did not command people to do evil. People do evil when it's in their hearts. People do evil because evil's in their hearts. It's not a command of God. It's not a gift of God. It's not something. People have been given will, and when evil comes in the world, it's because people are disobeying God's will. They're disobeying Ma'at, that conscience that's inside you that says, no, don't do that. You know that's not right. That isn't the thing you should do. A lot of times we have trained ourselves to ignore it. Whereas in ancient Kemet, they were training themselves as do not shorten the time of following your heart, because this offends your soul. It offends your spirit. They were training themselves to listen to that. They were training themselves to live by that, and to have a set of rules where you were manifesting divinity. And here, this is in the coffin text 4,000 years ago. They're saying, God is saying, I didn't command that people do evil. People do evil because they want to, because it's their will to, because it's in their hearts to do it. And when they disobey the commandments I give them, that's when they're doing evil. And I think that's a remarkable thing to express, because a lot of times we will ask the question, why did this bad things happen? Why do bad things happen? Why did God let this happen? And here God is saying, I didn't let this, I gave you will. I gave you the ability to correct things. I gave you the ability to have stewardship. I gave you a special place in creation. You can do things that no animals can do. You can do remarkable. You can change your environment. You can change your situation. You can change your living. I gave you an ability to choose that no other animal has. No other part of my creation has what you have in you. And that is your will. That is your haru, that manifestation of divinity, to live out God's will and to choose and to change your environment in a divine way. And you can choose. And when you choose to do wrong, and when you choose to do opposite of God's commandments, opposite of Ma'at, that is when evil comes. And so it's no special thing. It's no special, formula that we want to look at. Why is evil being done in the world? It's being done because people are doing it. We don't need to give people off the hook. It's being done because people choose to do evil. When you look and hey, I'm not supposed to do this. People all over the place knew that slavery was wrong. People knew that slavery was wrong. And Frederick Douglass famously said, every man under the canopy of heaven knows that slavery is wrong for him. Nobody wanted to trade places with a person who was enslaved, right? But we act like it was something that needed to be debated, something that needed to be talked about for hundreds of years, whether or not it was right. But everybody knew it was wrong for them. Evil people did slavery. People, because they had evil in their heart. They had racism in their heart. They had hate in their heart. They had greed in their heart. They had laziness in their heart. They had all kinds of things that manifest evil, that makes you want to do for yourself and not for your fellow man. So it's not a surprise. And here's, a doctrine that's talking about and discussing that, 4,000 years ago, that evil doesn't come in the world through God. It comes in the world through people's choices. Right. And then that makes us have to confront people and deal with the way we live. And I may even talk about, because I was thinking about earlier today, the whole idea of a rites of passage. And what is a rites of passage? As we think about a rites of passage, I think about a rites of passage not just as, something that you just do so that person gets a right to be an adult, like a kind of perfunctory, kind of just a ceremony you go through. You go through the ceremony, you get crossed up or whatever, and you are now in adulthood. It's deeper than that. I think a rites of passage really gives you tools. And I'll tell the story, because I was talking to this man one day, and this man was at a restaurant. He was the owner of a business, and he was telling me, he was from Africa. He was telling me of a rites of passage ceremony that he had in his people, from his people where he came from in Western Africa. And he was telling me about this whole story. And he said that there was there were several rites of passages. It wasn't just one. It was one that you did when you were like 15 or 16 or thereabouts, when you were about to become an adult, a man or a woman. There are various things. Men did one thing, women did another. And then there was another one you did when you were younger, right? When you were like 4 or 5 years old, depending upon like when your birthday fell or what age you were, that you did even before that. So you had more than one rites of passage. And he said, the rites of passage, no matter who you are and what you did, you had to do these rites of passage in front of people. And there was a man that had missed one of these rites of passage. And he said that his rites of passage, the way it was he was about 4 or 5 years old. When a man is about 4 or 5 years old, the young man would be asked and taught how to go out, get up early in the morning, like maybe 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, have to go out and catch a bird. And he may go out with an older cousin or an older brother, and they would go out early in the morning together, and they would have to use some type of slingshot, some type of handmade device, and to try to catch a bird, stun the bird, not kill the bird, but catch the bird, and then bring the bird back to his town where he was, where his mother was, and where his father was, and to show him that he had accomplished that task. And when he accomplished that task, he would go to his mother's, wherever his mother was, to his home, and she would say, "Rise. A new man is in the village. A new man is in the village." And he would do the same thing before his father. And his father would go, "A new man is in the village." And this is a young kid who's like 5 years old. This is what this man was explaining to me. And so he would go around, and he would go from his father, and his father would take him to his mother, or either his mother would take him to his father, and and all his family, the whole village would be like, the whole area would be like, a new man is in the village. And you might have several children, all of the same age, doing this at the same time, and they're doing this with their older brother or maybe their older cousin, and you had family members and cousins and extended family members who would see you having accomplished this task, being able to catch this bird without killing it, and being able to take it to them, and they would bring gifts to you. They might give you food or sweets or treats or maybe money or whatever they chose to give you. And the brother or the older cousin who was helping you would carry a basket, and they would put the money and the gifts or the sweets they have you in this basket. And then when the basket got full, you take it back home to mom, and mom, you dump it and you go back out. And this was an all day affair where all the people would know about it, and people would remember that was your first part, your early part of your rites of passage. As a young man, you had to be able to do that. And so he talked about how there was an older guy who was maybe in his 30s or something like that, and he had moved off to the city. He had left his traditional home. He'd moved to the city there in Africa where they were living, and he was going to get married. And he wanted to get married in a traditional way. And he brought his fiance to be back. And in order to get married in his traditional way by his traditional, people, and to have his ancestors and his elders respected, he had to go before his council. And when he went before the council of elders, they said to him, "Nobody here remembers you doing your first rites of passage." And he was like, "Huh?" And then he said, "No, I did my rites of passage." No, you did the second one. We all know you did the second one when you were like a teenager, but you didn't do the first one when you were 5. And he was like, "What?" He said, "You can't be a man. You can't be a leader or a man or take on a family in our village, in our area, within our customs, if you don't complete all of the rites of passage. You have to do all of these things. You have to show all of these characteristics before." And he was like, "Are you serious?" They were like, "Yep." You don't get to adulthood. And you think about adulthood, it's not just a ceremony. It's actually giving somebody the tools, right? The tools to be successful in the environment that they're going to go into. And they were saying, you haven't shown us, the village, you haven't shown your people that you've developed this character. And I know you've grown and you have a nice job and you have a nice wife to be, but we can't give you our blessing. You have to complete the rites of passage that you did, that's for 5-year-olds. And so he was kind of upset at first, but then he would say, "You know what? Okay, I get it. I'm going to do it." So the next time there was time for them to have the ceremony, he did it. And he did it with all these little kids. But obviously he was grown. He's like 30-something. He did it with all these little kids. And he ran around and he got the bird. He caught the bird. He didn't kill it. He was able to catch it with his bare hands and with a slingshot. And he went around. His mom was there. His dad was there. And they were like, "A new man is in the village." And it began to be something that was kind of fun. At first he was a little kind of jaded, but it became something fun. Everybody was laughing and joking. His family was there, and he was able to eventually get married and get the blessings of the elders in order to do that. And the whole idea behind that was your family had to see you, and your family had to give you things in order for you to be ready for adulthood. We send our children out into the world, and we don't prepare them with tools that they need to be successful. Like, imagine that same thing. Imagine if you were 10,000 years ago, 40,000 years ago, and you're in Africa or wherever you may be. You could be anywhere in the world, 40,000 years ago, and you're going out to try to find food and you don't have the tools. We get it in that mindset. We said we got to teach them, and then we say, you can't send somebody out into the world and they don't have the tools. And we think about, a lot of times when we think about preparing children for the future and preparing them for what they need to be, we prepare them in ways, maybe financially. We may prepare them educationally. Very rarely do we prepare them holistically from a spiritual standpoint. It isn't very common. Sometimes we do, but sometimes we don't do a good job preparing them from a health standpoint. How should you eat? How do you take care of yourself? How do you develop good habits? We really don't prepare them in terms of how to buy a house, how to manage your finances, how to do specific things. You may do some general things, but how to do specific things that are important for you in order for you to become a man or a woman or to start a family. How do you do these things to give people that education? How do you save for retirement? How do you find a wife? How do you find a husband? How do you choose a partner? What characteristics should you be looking at, and how should you play out those things in yourself? A lot of times we just say, figure it out. We don't give them the tools that it takes to really go forth and do the things they need to do. So as I think about rites of passages, and I think about some of the things that were being communicated in the Coffin text, it wasn't just about just ceremony. It was about, do you actually have these characteristics developed in you so that you can have the qualities it takes to, one, be in the afterlife, or to two, when you're here, be able to be an authority, to be a mother who is justified, who is seen as respected by her children, to be a father who is respected and remembered by his children, to be a king or a queen who is remembered and respected by God and chosen by God and revered by the people, and actually live according to the point where, as you see in the Coffin text, they'll talk about, I haven't let anybody be hungry in my area. I haven't let anybody be without a boat. If I saw somebody who needed something, I took care of them. I opened up my house to people who were in need. I took care of the people in my house, my mother and father's house. I took care of them. I take care of their tombs, their temples. I take care of my brothers and sisters. If people are hungry and I can provide for them, I don't let them walk by me hungry. I don't let them go searching for food for other people. I help the parent. They took a lot of time preparing somebody for the afterlife. And the idea, I think, the connection I make in my head is I think about rites of passage, that's also significant for us physically. We shouldn't just send a kid off into adulthood without the tools. I've never seen, for the most part, when I've seen people, like kids playing basketball or football, and then they have like a dad or a mom who's really into it, if that kid is struggling in the game, usually that dad doesn't say, oh, figure it out. Usually they'll pull them aside and say, look, you need to go up with your left. You need to take that guy around the right. That guy is coming on your left. You can take him to the right, or whatever it may be. They give them specific, and then they'll take them home and they'll give them training. They'll say, go do training early. And when they may get up 4:00 in the morning, like Kobe or something, and do training and train throughout the day and practice on your shot and do really rituals. I mean, they're really rituals. You begin to do things in practice that are repetition. They're rituals designed to improve your skills so you could be a better ball player. Nobody thinks that that's wrong, but we don't really think about that when it comes to finances. How do you manage money? From a spiritual standpoint, how do you develop a relationship with God? What tools do you need to have a healthy relationship with God? What should you make sure that you do not do? And the ancient Kemetic people were very specific on what you should and should not do. And a lot of that had to do with the laws of Ma'at. What do you do when you pick a partner? All of those things are very significant things. And I think we give them kudos for being that specific around, here's what you should not do. You should not lie. You should not murder. You should not mistreat the people who are in your family. You should make sure that you give your offerings to God. You should make sure that you're constant in prayer and you're in connection with the priest. You should make sure that you are treating the land well, that you are treating the people who come in contact with you and you have the ability to feed, that you should treat them well. They give you very specific things in the Coffin text, in the pyramid text, in the book of the coming forth by day, what people call the book of the dead. They give you very specific things in terms of what you should do and how you should live this life and in the afterlife. So that to me, I think is a connection and a very important point, and why rites of passages are important. So we may even talk about that. And I'd love to hear what your comments are and if you have thoughts about rites of passages, because why can't we share this? Why can't we talk about this? Maybe we can come up with or share techniques and deeds that people can do to help ensure that their children are prepared to have a healthy lifestyle, that they're prepared for education. Because I'm telling you guys, AI is going to change everything, is changing everything, that they're prepared spiritually in terms of being able to help mentally and emotionally in their connection with God and living a peaceful life, that they're prepared from a financial standpoint, that they're prepared when they develop relationships and they start families to be a leader, to be how do we give them the tools to do that? So I'd love to hear, please put some comments down below if you have answers to that or thoughts that we can talk about, things that we can share to get this out into the culture, into our community. with respect to that. And then, the other thing, one of the last things that he says in this four great deeds of Ra that are written in the Coffin text, several Coffin texts, is I made the hearts of men inclined not to forget their afterlife, not to forget their ancestors, so that the offerings will be made to gods that are expressions of me and to the ancestors, that I made people inclined not to forget life after death. I've made people inclined not to forget their ancestors. I made that connection to be there naturally so that people would keep up this relationship and keep up the offerings and keep up this connection with God, keep up their religion, if you will. That's a significant thing. And you would think, obviously, that we're going to miss people. We would be connected to people who are ancestors and people who passed on. But this is something that is being talked about in these four coffins and the part of the coffin text with respect to Ra, that I made people inclined not to forget their ancestors, not to forget the afterlife, to be connected with that, so that they would do things. And God bless you, Zolto Magnificent. God bless you. Thank you so much. I think this is just really good information to thank you so much. So I am sending you a message here. I really much appreciate it. These are just things that we got to talk about because we don't talk about it enough. You know what I mean? We just don't talk about these things enough. So God made people with respect to not wanting to be inclined to remember the afterlife, to be connected with God, so that religion and its connection with God will be there in your heart. And so that's another part of these great four deeds of Ra that they talked about. And then he also talks about, I created the deities, those expressions of myself from my own sweat, from my own work. And I created all people from the tears from my eye. And so from the tears of my eye and from the sweat of my brow, I made people, and I made the deities that are expressions of me. And so this is part of the four great deeds of Ra that are talked about here, that really just go through, that are talked about in the Middle Kingdom, that really just go through some magnificent things that as a creator, God did for us all. And these are things that are in the coffin text. This is in the coffin text, and you can rewind some of this and kind of go back through it as I kind of went through. If you need to rewind it, feel free to rewind this and go back and look at that. But these are things that are in the coffin text. And I would talk more about it kind of in the second half of this, where we started talking about, then they started to get into very specific things about, what I've done with my life and how that's going to translate into me, being in the afterlife and me being accepted by Asar or being an Asar itself. So you start to think about the coffin text, which progress into the book of coming forth by day, the Pertin Baru. They progress into that during the New Kingdom. You begin to see that progression. You begin to see people call themselves an Asar. You begin to see it. It's in the first person, and they refer to themselves as a deity, as being a manifestation of God. This is not a joke. They're not calling themselves. They don't have a low self-esteem or this grandiose idea that's not healthy. This idea that you are a manifestation of God. Imagine if everybody understood it. If everybody understood they were a manifestation of God, not just them, everybody else was too. That you're not special, and you are special. You're not special that you are a manifestation of God and the next person isn't. You're special that we all are manifestations of God, which is an amazing thing, which shows you how powerful God is. Imagine if people went through life that. Imagine if every woman had that understanding of herself as she met and she went off into motherhood, right? Talking about keys, right? To becoming an adult. As she went off into motherhood and began to start a family or started her career. Imagine if she had the idea of herself, and when people try to limit her. Imagine if every man, every black man, every white man, every man had this idea that I'm a manifestation of God, and so is every woman. I'm a manifestation, and nobody is better than me. That's a remarkable thing. And as I come through challenges, the challenges I face in life are just there for me to overcome, for me to express more of my divinity. If I think about them the right way, if I pray on them enough, if I seek my divinity, I can overcome just about anything that comes toward me. Imagine if we had it in a healthy way. There were a lot of things that may come up. We don't think, I'm just going to give up. I'm just not going to try. Maybe I can knock that down. Maybe I can beat that, because we do that when it comes to sports. We do that if you have a dream and you want to become an actor, or if you want to become something that's associated with money. Imagine that. We have that mindset when it's associated with material things. I'm going to do this because it's going to pay off to a lot of money. I'm going to keep doing it. But we don't have that mindset when it comes to challenges, emotional challenges, or things that may happen at your job, or things that may happen in a relationship, or when you come up against people who might be racist or might be sexist or something. Sometimes you're going to have challenges in life that are going to force you to manifest your divinity. And I always say, if you want real muscles, you got to lift real weights. And when it comes to spirituality, life is a real weight. Life is a real challenge. Life is a real test. You're going to get real weights to live, real things to do that are going to develop you spiritually. And the things that you overcome, the things that you do with your life, you're going to be amazed at. You're going to say God is magnificent. You're going to say Haru exists. You're going to say I'm really a manifestation. God, this is amazing. The things that you can do, you're going to be impressed with. You're going to see God's divinity when you start to approach life like that and understand that these things that you face are not that big at all, that you can actually overcome. They may be challenges, but once you overcome a man, you're going to see how God's divinity is working in you. So I just wanted to share that. I pray that you put your thoughts down below. If you have comments about rites of passage or things you'd like to see and more you'd like to hear, I very much pray that you put it down there. I thank you so much for joining and listening, and I hope you have a good day. God bless you. And I'll take a look at this some more. So I thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate it. Hope you guys have a good day. God bless you. Talk to you soon.